Everyone, and welcome to today's presentation, Clinical Trial Expense Accruals, Easing the Challenge in Audit Risk. As part of today's webinar, we will be covering the following: facing expense accrual challenges and the importance of getting accruals right, the consequences of not getting it right, problems with the traditional accrual process, increased regulatory scrutiny and audits, how purpose-built, activity-based automated technology can help to record expense accruals, vet data, and ensure accuracy. For those of you that are new to Clinverse, Clinverse architected the industry's first automated financial management technology solutions for clinical trials. Powered by our secure technology platform, our solutions standardize clinical trial finance and manage millions of financial transactions globally, including clinical site payments. Used by leading biopharma companies, our company allows clients to benefit from reduced workload, time, and costs gained through automation and unprecedented transparency in workflow. A few logistical items before we get started today. You will receive a copy of today's presentation slides and recording from our Marketing Director, Lauren Carr. We welcome your questions, so please address any questions or need for clarification using your go-to webinar controls. We will address as many questions as time allows at the conclusion of the webinar. Okay, let's get started with today's presentation. I would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Tim Immel, Chief Product Officer and founder of Clinverse. Over 25 years of experience in operations and financial management with extensive experience in software development and innovation for business processes, forecasting, and operational system implementation. Prior to founding Clinverse, Tim was the Chief Financial Officer of Nerix Pharma, a specialty biopharmaceutical company, where he was responsible for all accounting, finance, information systems, and a variety of operational functions, and played a key role in Nerix's global patent strategy, with 2 issued patents and 50 pending. His Nerix experience provided an in-depth knowledge of the operations of clinical trials and associated financial management. Tim began his career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Tim, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that intro. And I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today. So prior to founding Clinverse and being the CFO of a biopharma company, we outsourced our site payments to a large CRO, and PricewaterhouseCoopers were our auditors. And when the first quarter came around, I knew I had a problem because we didn't get the reporting for the quarter-end accrual that I was expecting. And so what we had to do is we had to load the CTAs into Excel, the clinical trial agreements for the sites into Excel, and then we would use the IWRS data for enrollment, and then based on the schedule of assessment dates, we would progress the subjects along the visits. And then we'd calculate what we had owed, and then we'd book that as a reversing entry. And this was not the most accurate method, but it was what we had to do. So in founding Clinverse, one of the major reasons for doing so was to automate the financial accrual for site payments. And I look forward to sharing some accrual information with you today. So what is an accrual? Accrual accounting recognizes the economic events in the period the events occurred. And it has nothing to do with when the payment will be made or if the payment will ever be made. So in the graphic on the screen, the economic event is the day the doctor fulfills the legal obligation, which in this case is July, and your financial statements should reflect this event in July, and not in October when the procedure or the visit, the economic event, is finally paid. And so this concept is applied to all outsourced work being performed to conduct a clinical trial. And we'll explore this much further in today's meeting. Next. Now, what I just said sounds pretty simple. You just accrue the expense in the period that the work was performed. However, with the increasing complexity of clinical trials, which we all know is related to a variety of items, it also drives the complexity of CTA agreements with sites and statement of work documents that are used, legal contracts that are used for other vendors. Now, this is important. Expense accruals for clinical trials are one of the most important and challenging accounting tasks to get right. Next. So what we're looking at here are the main categories of clinical trial expenses that are typically outsourced to vendors and most likely require an accrual calculation. And so from this table, you can see that the top two expenses are site payments and site monitoring. And so the percentages that you see here, if your clinical trial budget was $20 million, you would have approximately $8.2 million in site payments, and you would have $2.2 million for monitoring. And this table also shows how the expense is managed. So either through a clinical trial agreement for the site payments, or through statement of works for the other vendors, such as CROs, labs, specialty groups, etc. The other categories are typically outsourced to vendors, such as CROs and labs and these specialty groups. But what I have done here also is the internal costs of 30%. Those are your internal sponsor costs, which include payroll. And that accrual process we're not going to be discussing about today because that's not that's a different process. We're going to be talking about accruing for outsourced partners. I also want to state that in late stage clinical trials, you have several CROs managing these expense categories. In addition, there may be hundreds of investigator sites and many other vendors, all of which can be in multiple countries. Next. So let's take a look at the statement of work. These legal documents will play a critical role in determining what the accrual should be. So based on the work performed by the vendor, first and foremost, the statement of work should be well defined. This means to break out the work into the appropriate units for that specific clinical trial. And this is going to be a combination of hours. It could be based on number of CTAs that have been signed, number of sites that have been sent the feasibility questionnaire, number of unique fields on a CRF. The more granular that the work is broken out and defined, the greater the accuracy of the accrual is going to be. So the statement of work should be easy to understand. Misinterpretation can lead to accruing one number, and then later the invoice arrives and it's a much different number. Additionally, the assumptions should be detailed and not subject to interpretation, because changes in assumption drives change orders. And when change orders are not properly tracked and communicated, a large invoice can show up that was not previously accrued. So to calculate the expense to be accrued, you simply take the work that has been performed by the unit types and multiply it by the unit amount. But I'm going to leave us with a question here. Is it really that simple? Are there challenges obtaining accurate and timely operational data that's required for this calculation? Next. Now let's take a look at a clinical trial agreement. These agreements outline site payments, which is the largest expense of late-phase clinical trials. In the previous table that we were reviewing, I noted it was 41% of the total expense budget for the clinical trial. But if you were to exclude the internal costs of the 30%, it's really a much larger number of the outsourced work, and it's near 60%. And what that means is it's a much larger material amount of your total vendor accrual. And so the point is it's very important to accrue site payments, payments owed to investigators, to get that right. Now, I could say in my experience, there's a lot of time and attention that goes into the amount that the procedure should be paid for. And that is probably because amounts are highly regulated. Next. So I just stated that the primary focus is on the amount, and as an industry, we do a good job there. But what I've seen is there's a lot of ambiguity around when the event has been earned and is payable to the site. So ambiguity in CTA agreements can cause accrual issues, not to mention that it can frustrate the site. So the event should be well defined. Be specific. State in the CTA how you're going to pay it. Are you going to pay when the visit or procedure is completed? State it. Are you going to pay when all CRFs have been entered into the EDC system for that visit or that procedure? Are you going to pay when all CRFs have been monitored and query-free? The contract terms agreed to should be easily, systematically calculated. So you should be able to define the term to where you can calculate if it's owed and not subjective. They either did the work or they didn't do the work. So similar to the SOWs, you should be able to take the data, and in this case, 90% of the data will come from EDC systems or the data management system if you're still doing paper trials, and apply the data to the well-defined terms and calculate your accrual. So again, I'm going to leave us with an open-ended question here. Is it really that simple? Okay, so we have our first polling question here. And when would you accrue the following? Pay 30 days, and the question here is, pay 30 days from when the visit date occurred and all CRFs were monitored. Would you accrue it upon all CRFs being monitored and query-free? Would you accrue it on the date of visit, or are you unsure? Okay, so I like it. That's about what we see. Usually what I see is 50-50. It comes out 50-50 on when to accrue it. And you know, this is something that you would discuss with your financial auditors. But the reason for doing it upon all CRFs being monitored and query-free is that's when the legal obligation occurred. And if you have the data to be able to determine that, that's when you would accrue it. But again, you work with your internal auditors. The conservative side is the visit occurred, I'm going to accrue it, and I know eventually they're going to, it's going to get monitored and it's going to be queried free. Next. Okay, so within clinical trial agreements, you have unique terms that are specific to CTAs, such as holdback expenses. And holdback expenses are generated when an event, such as a procedure or a visit amount, is discounted by 10% to 20%. And that amount that's discounted is paid at a later date. So in the example shown on the slide, The procedure amount negotiated was $1,000. Now, to earn the $100, future events that are outlined in the CTA agreement are required for the investigative site to earn that holdback. And usually those include the operational events associated with site closeout. And site closeout can be years after the visit. So you're not going to pay that $100 until site closeout events that are outlined in the clinical trial agreement are performed, and that occurs years into the future. And I do want to note that these amounts can add up to several millions of dollars on large trials. So we have another polling question for you. When do you accrue for holdback expenses? At the time it's held back? When the site has complied and earned the holdback? Or don't accrue the holdback until it's ready to be paid? And we'll give you a moment here to make that selection. Okay, so this is another one that that is typically 50-50, and the interesting is this is 54%, which is on the previous question, the accrued at time of visit was 54%, and so I was expecting actually to see these a little even, but this is great. So sponsors take different stances on whether or not to accrue the holdback amount at the time of visit or wait until the site has earned the holdback back. And again, that's because there's specific things that sites have to do in the future, and if they don't perform those duties, they're not going to get that holdback money, and that's the reason why you're holding it back. The decision is also based sometimes on how many years. If it's going to occur within the same year, you might not go through that work to not accrue it and then accrue it in the future. And most importantly, how many hurdles are there for the site to earn that weighs into the decision. But again, these are discussions that you would have with your financial auditors. Next. So calculating accruals for clinical trials is not that easy, and it's not that easy for the following reasons. Historically, it's been challenging to get timely and accurate data, and especially challenging when you think back to paper-based trials, which was not so long ago and still exists somewhat today. And additionally, I believe the biggest issues is we have not changed our processes and tools to calculate accruals. The current process for calculating site payment data looks like the following. A clinical research associate collects the data in a Microsoft Excel tracker when the monitoring visit occurs. This Excel tracker is then used to look up the CTA terms and perform manual calculations in Excel. And this process can take months depending on the monitoring schedule. And so this is not timely enough nor complete enough to be used in generating a period end expense accrual. So what do? We revert back to what I described in the beginning, which is building an Excel model to calculate estimates based off minimal amount of data, the IVR data for enrollment, and progress the subject based on the assessment, the days in between the visits. And even over the last decade, the availability of timely and accurate data has become available. It just hasn't been leveraged. And this is what we're going to be exploring next, and the need for purpose-built software to be able to manage your accrual in an automated fashion. Next. Okay, so I can say that every time I see the new stats, it's surprising to me on how much the cost goes up to bring a new drug to market. And on the slide that we're looking at here, according to a study by the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development, a new prescription medicine that gains marketing approval is estimated to cost $2.6 billion. And these clinical trial expenses are very significant to the sponsor's financial statements. And accurate financial reporting depends heavily on the accuracy of the clinical trial expense accrual, especially since a majority of the expense is outsourced to vendors. Next. Managing the calculation of the clinical trial accrual commonly falls under the finance department. However, many organizations depend heavily on their clinical staff to participate in the formulation of the accrual. And late-phase clinical trials continue to grow in size, complexity, and cost, and this generates a large number of vendors with complex contracts based on statement of works, and which makes it very challenging to track the work that has been performed. And a large global trial might involve hundreds of investigative sites across the globe, and multiple CROs and other vendors are all performing billable work, which must be accrued for in every period in which the services were rendered. Sponsors rely heavily on their vendors, such as CROs, for their financial reporting. That's the fact. And this includes the work units that have been performed. And so they either have to provide you with what your financial accrual for the work that's accrued, or they need to provide you with the data so sponsors can calculate their own site accrual. Because of the untimeliness of the reporting from vendors, one option is to set vendor calls. So, and of course you would exclude sites in these vendor calls, and you can do this on a quarterly basis to have a financial review for each quarter end and review what work has been performed, which is then entered into a large complex Excel model to generate what should be accrued. And in one organization, I've heard that they make about 100 phone calls a quarter. And this is a financial call, it's a financial health check at the end of each quarter to make sure that you're in sync on the work that's been completed and what's going into your financial accrual. So we're now at polling question number 3. And so polling question number 3 is, do you receive timely and accurate data from your CRO or other vendors to calculate your accrual? Okay, so 60% at no and 40% at yes. So next slide. So over the past decade, the industry has eliminated many manual processes, including the handling of paper case report forms with EDC technologies. Purpose-built clinical trial technologies are increasingly being adopted. This means that technology has paved the way for timely and accurate clinical and operational data. With the advances in the clinical trial automation, sponsors have not yet fully leveraged this data. So the point is, the technologies have brought this data to become available, but it's still not being leveraged, and it's not being leveraged to receive it timely or for applications to use it. And it will take a purpose-built technology to truly take advantage of this data. Next. Okay, so consequences of not getting it right. The consequences of not getting it right can be ugly, as we all know, especially since expense accruals are often a material component of a company's financial statements. Consequences can be a result of significant deficiencies in the accrual calculation or a material weakness in internal controls, both resulting in your auditors generating a letter to your audit committee, which we don't want. Or it could be as severe as a financial restatement. Now, I've heard numerous times that one of the leading causes of restatements is erroneous expense accruals. This refiling of a company's previously reported financials can have dire consequences, such as damaging a company's reputation, diminishing investors' confidence, and if you're a public company, this can cause company stock prices to decline. All of this can lead to embarrassment. It can lead to lack of trust with your board of directors, and it can also lead to job loss, none of which are good. Next. So let's do a review of the rules. So it's given that escalating issues and challenges of generating accurate expense accrual, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has increased pressure on sponsors to report accurate financials. Increased accuracy is directly related to the effect of internal controls, policies, and systems to improve reporting accuracy. So auditors and governing boards are also scrutinizing clinical trials at much greater detail, and we're going to review that, because they know there's a high chance of error. Next. So let's quickly review the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The SEC administers the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. We refer to this as SOX. This is a federal law that establishes strict standards for both private and publicly traded U.S. companies. The SOX laws require internal controls for ensuring the accuracy of financial reports and disclosures, and mandates audits and reports on those controls. So let's go to our next polling question. Are you familiar with an SSAE Type 2 report and the purpose of the report? Interesting. Okay, so let's go to the next slide and review what that report is. So that was a high response on not knowing what an SSAE 16 Type 2 report is, and it's very important when you outsource your financial back office accounting. And so if SOX compliant is important to you, and you outsource a component of your accounting, for example, investigator payments, which we previously discussed is the largest expense category for late-stage clinical trials. The auditors need to rely on well-documented controls of duties between the sponsor and the service provider, and use of vendor reports for financial reporting. Additionally, management will either need to conduct an evaluation of the service provider's organization controls, or preferably the service provider should be SSAE 16 Type 2 compliant and provide you with a service auditor's report, which is the SSAE 16 Type 2 report. And this report contains information on the 5 components of internal controls as it relates to the service organization. So the service organization is doing your back office accounting because they're making your site investigator payments, providing you with some financial data, or providing you with data to calculate your accrual. And it helps ensure, this report helps ensure that your service provider has adequate controls and the effectiveness of the controls by providing an independent assessment of whether the controls were in place, in operation, suitably designed, and operating effectively. And this report will also address your service provider's infrastructure. So they will report on the security access and the controls that are governing the access to the financial application that generates the reports that you need or that you use for your financial accrual. This report will allow your financial auditors, so you'll be given this report and you will provide this report to your financial auditors on the service provider's controls. So if SOX compliant is important to you, and again, you're outsourcing a component of your financial operations, then I would strongly recommend that your vendor needs to be SSAE Type 2 certified. In the absence of such a report, your company must take responsibility for the assessment of their controls. And this may include having to send your auditors to the service provider to perform their audit procedures. This can, as you can imagine, increase the cost and the time of performing your financial audit. Next. So the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, which is the PCAOB, Staff Audit Practice Alert number 11 was issued in late 2014. And this highlights the concerns about the clinical trial accrual process. It specifically calls it out, and I would look into this alert for more details. But the concerns include management's review of controls and IT considerations. And IT consideration refers to the data and reports that are system generated. And so this alert number 11 expands the requirements regarding internal controls over financial reporting, including clinical trial accruals. Again, it specifically calls out clinical trial accruals as part of the SOX assessments. Next. So best practices for clinical trial accruals: effective collaboration with your service provider, consistent procedures, well-documented processes, well-documented controls, and most important, a service provider that uses a purpose-built application to take advantage of the timely and accurate data currently available to facilitate the automation of a timely and accurate accruals. It's silly that we can't provide that today with the advances in technology that provide all of this timely, accurate data with technology that's been adopted over the last decade. Next. Here we have 10 criteria for an optimal financial accrual system. We're going to be sending out the slides, so I'm not going to read each of these important criteria. But what I want to do is I want to highlight a couple of them. If you use an outsourced partner to provide accounting services, such as a vendor performing your site payments, partner with a vendor that has a current SSAE 16 Type 2 certification. It's important if SOX compliance is important to you. Next slide. Whether you choose to select technology to use in-house or you outsource the entire site payment and accrual process, or you perform a hybrid, your combined system and processes need to be global. So you need to think about it from a global perspective and select your choices based on the global experience and system capabilities. Next slide. Electronic signature of who did what when is very important, especially with SOX compliance, and recording external data into your financials. So it doesn't matter if you're public or if you're private, you need the audit trail to trace the transactions back into your service provider system with the electronic signatures of who did what when, especially if you're working in a hybrid situation where you're using an application and you have your outsourced provider in the application and you also have access to that application. The auditors need to rely well on these documented controls. And the last one I'll mention is be sure that you have well-defined CTAs and SOWs and request the data from your service provider to be able to perform your calculations against these contracts.
We hope you have found this information valuable. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, a copy of the slide deck and webinar recording, our associated white paper, will be sent out to you in the next couple of weeks. That brings us to the part of our webinar where we take your questions. If you haven't already, please submit your questions and discussion points in the chat box. We will likely be unable to answer all of the questions today, but if you submit a question and we don't get to it today, we'll be blogging in the upcoming weeks as a follow-up to this webinar, and we'll get to as many questions as possible. Be sure to check into the Clinverse blog often for more information. If you're ready, Tim, let's see what questions we have.
Okay, so there's a question that came in that said, you mentioned use of Excel frequently. Do you have any concerns about having an accurate audit trail? And yes, absolutely. I have significant issues with having an accurate audit trail. And that's one of the reasons why I mentioned that having an electronic signature of who did what when is very important, again, especially with SOX compliance. Okay, there's another question that came in. It said, do you have a suggestion on how to get information from your vendors more timely? And so during the call, I mentioned that some companies have a quarterly call with their vendors for a financial health check, make sure they're on the same page, make sure there's change orders that they're not aware of, make sure that the work that's been completed, of course, they have to take that information that's put into Excel and calculate their accrual, but it's one way to do it. Another is I would recommend putting the reporting requirements in the statement of work. So if you list the reporting requirements of what data they need to provide you by what time, you know, that should help accelerate it as well. And of course, using a purpose-built technology that can auto-pull this operational data from CTMS systems or the IVRS system or the EDC system and help you automatically calculate that accrual based on the terms of the agreements that have been put into this system is the best way. Okay, so one more question. It said in the poll question, you asked if the holdback should be accrued, and what's your opinion? I basically answered that during the question, but just to reiterate, first and foremost, you should check with your financial auditors, and I've seen it both ways, and I've seen it both ways around 50-50. And it really depends on, again, the length of the trial, if that money is not going to be owed for 5 years out, and more importantly, the contractual terms that the site has to perform to even get that money back. So by accruing it at the time of visit, that's a very conservative approach. But if your trial, of course, is going to end within a 12-month period or within your accounting fiscal year, you might go ahead and do that. But again, ask your financial auditors. Okay, so that's all the time that we have for today. And
we apologize we weren't able to get to your question today. However, we will collect all of the unanswered questions and answer them through blog posts on our website. Thank you for your time today, and we hope you have a wonderful day.